Good morning. My name is Stefano Carpani. I'm a psychoanalyst, a Jungian psychoanalyst and a sociologist, and I am on my way to work, driving my car. Last night, there was no clear result from the US election. The word is suspended, or the word has not yet received information who is going to be the next US president. But I want to be very provocative and ask, does it matter? Is it going to make a difference who is going to be the next US president? Of course, Trump has his style, his language, and Biden has a different one. He was called the grandfather, yeah? But from a policy point of view, from a political point of view, administrative point of view, foreign policy point of view, is it gonna matter? Is it gonna be different? I would say no. I would say no for a different reason, and the main reason is United States hegemonic, imperialistic view of the world, which is actually what Europe used to do and what China is trying to do. In fact, I think that the Spanish flu 100 years ago made possible the shift between the European empire, let's put it this way, and the American empire. And perhaps this time, with coronavirus, it will be possible another shift from the US or Western empire to the Chinese empire. But let's go back to the presidential election. I don't think they will change much, because the US about order or new order. Let me now park, let me now get up to my office, and I would like to talk to you about the new order and empire. See you in a bit. I made it to my office. It took longer than I thought. It's almost 3 p.m. here in Central Europe, so it's 8:30 a.m. in the morning. There is no answer. There is no winner. Although Trump is saying a lot of bullshit. Let me say, Trump is saying a lot of bullshit. And Halloween was last week, but this year, 2020, Halloween is lasting much, much longer. But hey, Trump is not the problem. He is not really the problem. He's the first Republican US president who didn't start a war in his time as president. Let's look at George W. Bush, George H. Bush, and the previous ones. Why do I say this? Because talking about the Bushes, father and son, I want to talk about New Order, meaning, and the numinous. In my paper, The Numinous and the Fall of the Berlin Wall, I claim that for history to happen, there's also a need for the numinous. For events, for transformation, there must be the numinous. Yeah? So in that paper, and I'm reading now from the end of that paper, I look into the concept of the numinous and how this affects history. And also look at meaning. That meaning needs not to be sought at all. We always look for meaning. We need meaning because otherwise we feel empty. But actually, one example about love, when we are in love, we don't look for meaning, we don't look for understanding, we don't look for knowledge. When we lose love, we look for meaning. Why did that happen? Why was it so or so? So, meaning needs not to be sought. Meaning needs not to be sought if Biden or Trump wins, or why Trump won against Hillary. Actually, it was better. And either Hillary Clinton didn't want to serve the country. She wanted to become the first female president. That's it. It was compensation. Adlerian compensation. So, the meaning needs not to be sought. Above all, I want to contradict Francis Fukuyama, who is in the early 90s, theorized that, quote, what we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution, and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. He thought that was going to happen after the 90s was the universalization of Western liberal democracy, American democracy, as the final form of human government. He was wrong. And he proved, actually, he said he was wrong in his latest book published in 2018. So I claim that there has been no end of history, as there has been no shift from modern to a postmodern era. But as I said this morning, perhaps the only shift is from one empire to another, from the European Empire to the North American Empire, and now the shift from the North American or Western Empire to the Chinese one. On the one hand, I continue, ideologies are substituted by new ones, perhaps even by the universalization of Western liberal democracy as a form of government that will eventually be substituted by a new one, as in fact it happened, so ad infinitum. And that, on the other hand, the so-called Western liberal model has demonstrated itself to be anything but liberal, thus engendering the rise of fundamentalism and populism, fanaticism and antagonism. Isn't this what happened in the past 20 years? And now I want to look at what President George H.W. Bush said on a very important day, on September 11th, 1989, 2 months before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And on a very important day for the United States, 11th of September. So, George H.W. Bush gave a speech titled New Order. What did he mean? In his speech to the nation on 11 September 1999, in front of a Congress crowded with only men and top-rank military, he promoted a new order, his new order. Quote, a new order, quote, freed from the threat of terror, stronger in the pursuit of justice and more secure in the quest for peace. An era in which the nation of the world, East and West, North and South, can prosper and live in harmony. End quote. He continued, hundreds of generations have searched for this elusive path to peace, while 1,000 wars rage across the human endeavor, and today that new world is struggling to be born. A world quite different than the one we have known. A world where the rule of law supplants the rule of the jungle. A world in which the nations recognize the shared responsibility for freedom and justice. A world where the strong respect the rights of the weak. End of quote. Can you believe this? Can you believe that George H.W. Bush said these words in front of the Congress on 11 September 1889? Events since this speech include, but are not limited to, the first invasion of Iraq, Sarajevo, the war in the former Yugoslavia, 9/11, the war in Afghanistan, the second invasion of Iraq, the bombing of Belgrade, Al-Qaeda, Syria, and IS, without forgetting the terrorist attack in Europe. The keywords that come to my mind when watching this speech are will to power, hypocrisy, and greed. I also wonder whether Fukuyama's End of History was inspired by this speech. It's quite a naive speech. It's quite an idealistic speech. It's quite a fairy tale with no shadow. A new era did start, indeed, although not one of peace. Not one where the rule of law supplanted the rule of the jungle, and especially not one in which nations recognize their shared responsibility for freedom and justice, where the strong respect the rights of the weak. To believe so would be naive. As psychoanalysts then, what is our role? Taking into consideration Jung's quote that, quote, to cure one individual is to cure the war, the word. Or when looking at Andrew Samuel, who says that psychoanalysis is activism. Is it possible to accomplish this? To cure one individual is to cure the world? Is it possible to be activist and psychoanalyst? How can we accomplish what Otto Gross would call will to reciprocity or plurality, as Andrew Samuels underlined? How do you feel about Bush father words? It's interesting, huh? A bit psychotic. Therefore, I claim that the idea of global liberal democracy based on the Western model has proved to be both naive and Wotanistic, from Wotan, the Germanic god of death. The empire myth based on domination of the other, which is always the weaker. And a new myth is now required. In fact, this morning, BBC journalist Katya Adam, let me check her email because I don't want to say something wrong. I wrote it down and I have to look for it. Katya Adler, BBC Europe editor, said something very important when looking at the fact that a new era, a new myth is required. She said this is a very important opportunity, the election, for America to look inward. Oh yeah. For America, from the Western world, and perhaps for the whole world, especially in parallel to the coronavirus. And another thing, the US is not the center of the world. The US president is not the boss of the world. Actually, this is fake news, that the US president is the most important person. So, the world, I propose, seems to be stuck and in pain, or out of joint, as sociology suggests. To think that the world will become a global liberal democracy is to live in another cuckoo land, and rather than predicting a profit-driven future model, we should instead denounce the narcissism, will to power and domination, anxiety and aggressivity, corruption and hypocrisy, hedonism, anger, inflation and grandiosity of our society. And in this way, perhaps, help to put forward a development, help to put forward a transformation, with or without the advent of the numinous, to enable us to live in a less schizophrenic world than that one pictured by Jung. I believe that the world will continue evolving in an atemporal and uroboric cyclic way, just as it always has. It will continue to swing uninterruptedly through the season of the year, between days of sun and rain, between war and peace, and wars fought in the name of peace. Thus, when examining history and paraphrasing Giegerich, this is it. The world contains everything it needs within itself. And our continuous seeking is merely our running away from our own fulfillment. I wish, following Otto Gross, that we could move from a society based on will to power to one based on will to reciprocity, where mutuality, equality, and equivalence and social or psychosocial generativity are key features. But we are far from this, and every attempt toward this model will no doubt be compensated by its opposite. Trump is not the problem. Let's be serious. Let's be less naive. In fact, Trump didn't start any war. Thank you. Bye-bye. By the way, long life to Trump. You know why? It's not a joke, although it sounds a little bit banal, but it's ironic. Long life to Trump, because it's thanks to Trump that we can really get in contact with our shadow. He's a buffoon, he's a clown, or somebody says he's a trickster. And he's, as a buffoon, as a clown, he doesn't have a persona. Of course he has a persona, but his persona, the filter with reality, is actually weakened, softened. That's why he says what he says, unless he's a great actor. And I would like to say again something very provocative. Long life to Trump, because those men of power that seems proper, that have integrity, actually if we scratch the surface, we see that their integrity is nothing else than a persona exercise. And I want to conclude talking about a movie that is not perhaps the best movie in the world, but is Sacha Baron Cohen Borat, or the second version. It's a movie that makes people laugh. It is a movie that at some point, one of the characters, an Afro-American, a black American woman, says to Borat's daughter, "Your father is a liar. Don't trust your father." And he will say, "I don't know, we'll think about it." And this African-American woman says, "Yeah, all I want is you to think about it." That's very important. We need to think about things. We need to go deeper and stop to have opinion. Opinions are borrowed, as Berkeley would say, as Giegerich would say. We need to think, to go inward. Thank you.